Wake that ass up.
Early in the morning.
The Breakfast Club.
Morning, everybody. It's DJ Envy, Angela Yee, Charlamagne the Guy. We are the Breakfast Club. We have a special guest in the building. She's running for mayor of New York City, Wiley. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
We're doing well. So why do you want to run for mayor in this crazy-ass city?
Because I love this crazy ass city. I got 2 daughters born and raised in this crazy ass city. And the truth is, we don't have to be a crazy ass city. We can actually be a city where we can all afford the rent, where we can actually invest in our kids to have an excellent education, and where, frankly, we can confront the lie that says that we have to choose between crime or being safe from police violence. We don't have to choose, we can have both. And as a longtime civil rights lawyer, and in particular as a Black woman in America, I just think it's time that we do what we need done for our communities.
You know, I do want to ask you about that because I'm a resident in Brooklyn and I'm born in Brooklyn, raised in Brooklyn. And I wanted to ask you about that because it has been a really crazy time in New York City. And even with the police, like, it's just such a dilemma for us, right? Because we want to make sure that we're protected, we're safe, and we can call the cops when we need them. But at the same time, you want to feel like we're protected and the cops aren't there to attack us and treat us the same as they treat everybody else. So how do you find that balance?
You know, that is the question that there are answers to, and that's why this election is so important, because you're absolutely right. We should be able to have both. So one, it means focusing police on the job of policing. You know, one of the biggest problems we have in this city is not that we don't have enough police officers. We have more police officers than most countries have armies. The problem is that we're not using those resources wisely and smartly and focused on what we need them focused on. And we're not investing in the kinds of responses that we need that are not the job of police officers. And I'll give you a very practical example because, you know, when I was at the vigil for Justin Wallace, that incredibly horrific shooting of that 10-year-old child, you know, the people who are holding the vigil are the people who live in the community, who are the crisis management response team. That means the people from the community who are trained and expert in reaching out to folks who have trauma, who have beef, who know and understand where and how violence might jump off and prevent the gun from being shot in the first place. And what they were saying at that vigil is that the demands they have been making have gone unmet. And it's for things like social workers. It is for trauma-informed care and having more resources to do what actually prevents the violence in the first place. And when I say we don't have to choose, what I mean is we have to be smart about our public dollars and we have to balance the investments. So instead of calling a police officer to do the job of a mental health expert, we're actually hiring and paying for the people to respond to the calls that require a mental health expert. And that's up to 40% of calls that go to the NYPD. So part of focusing this in the right way is making sure that we're actually investing in the community services and supports that prevent the violence in the first place, and focus the police on doing the job, but doing it accountably. And I have a plan for accountability as well, because if you follow the rules, you will be rewarded. If you ignore the rules, you will be punished. It's that simple.
What was the main reason why you decided to run? What was something that you said, you know what, I need to change this? What was that thing?
You know, I will say it was more than one, but it really did come down initially, and I was starting to think about it before COVID hit, because, you know, Donald Trump was president. He was attacking all of the gains that we've made for racial justice in this country, and we had not yet made enough. But some of the ones we had, like voting rights, like making sure that we had police accountability, he was unraveling what the Obama administration had done there. His attack on immigrants, so much, and on the census. I mean, a fundamental democratic practice that we had to struggle against just to get our people counted, to get our federal dollars. So that, I think, you know, some of that was planting the seed, but it really went to affordability. And I'll tell you, you know, my daughter, who is, you know, an artsy kid, she and all her friends and all my kids' friends, we got I have a godson in public housing, all the things they want for themselves, all the things that they were born into this city to do and that they can offer this city. They're struggling to figure out how they can afford to live here, the city they were born in, the city they were raised in, the city they didn't want to leave. And so making sure we could pay the rent and not become a city that started to look like San Francisco, where all the people of color get pushed out of the city, that was a real draw for me, because I know what that feels like. I lived in a Black neighborhood where we got gentrified and displaced when I was a kid, and I'm 57. This is something we haven't stopped. I wanted to keep New York, New York, and that means keeping us all here, but also do it in a way that, as I've done my whole career, focused on making sure, Southeast Queens and Northern Manhattan, the Bronx, Brownsville and East New York and East Flatbush, Northern Shore of Staten Island, that all the communities that keep getting ignored when it comes to solving problems, all of which are fixable, required an attention that was going to focus on our communities so that we stay a city we all love, but we also stay a city that has all of us in it.
Yeah, I tell people all the time when they try to move to New York, I'm like, I'm going to tell you right now, you have to make money to live in New York because you will not live well. It's so hard to afford to live here.
Well, that's exactly why I've got a bold plan. I'm the only candidate in this race who, in addition to saying I'll build more affordable housing we can actually afford, in fact, I'm going to double the capital construction budget of this city, which is the budget we use to build affordable housing. I'm gonna make sure home health aides can afford the rent. I'm gonna make sure nurses can afford the rent. I'm gonna make sure taxi drivers can afford the rent. But here's the thing, when 45% of New Yorkers are paying more than 30% of their income on rent, that's what the federal government says you shouldn't pay more than if housing is affordable. We got almost half the city paying too much. There are too many people in this city trying to decide between whether to eat a meal or pay the rent. And that is wrong. And too many of them look like us. So in my housing plan, I will subsidize the rent for a family of 3 earning $54,000 a year or less. We'll subsidize it so you don't have to pay more than 30% of your income on rent. Because while we build more affordable housing, and we can't just build ourselves out of this immediate crisis or the crisis coming down the road, because even before COVID, we had far too many people facing eviction and struggling to make ends meet. And I'm going to change that.
How do you plan to attack crime? I see crime has risen so much in New York City. People are scared to go outside. And it's not just in certain areas, it's everywhere. It's in Manhattan, it's in the Bronx, it's in Brooklyn, it's in Queens. How do you plan to slow that down?
Well, look, by addressing it head on, I'm going to keep New York safe, and I'm going to do it smartly. Because number one, as I've always said, we've got to focus police on the job of policing. We have far too many police officers responding to calls that aren't policing calls. They're mental health calls. We've got to stop that so they can focus on keeping illegal guns out of our city and off our streets. But it also means building up the communities, because it's the same communities that have the highest rates of gun violence right now are the same communities that had the highest rates of gun violence in 1993. This is not new for us. And what that means, though, is rather than making the same mistakes of just saying more police officers on the corner, my friend lost his nephew on October 22nd to gun violence at 4:30 p.m. in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn. But what happened as a response to that shooting was they put more police officers on the corner. And guess what happened? 2 more shots fired in plain view of those police officers half a block away. Wow. We have to stop pretending that solves the problem. And that was my point about Justin Wallace and what we heard from violence interrupters. I heard it in Brownsville too, where violence interrupters, in fact, in Brownsville, one of the highest rates of gun violence, had one of the safest weeks they ever had. That residents reported being one of the safest weeks because community-based organizations, including the crisis management teams, asked the precinct to step away, step back, let the community deal with some of the community issues. in community-based organizations, expert at dealing with them, not because they didn't want the police. In fact, they had a good relationship with that precinct commander, which is why the police precinct commander stepped back. Mm-hmm. And what happened was exactly what we need to happen. Both a good, trusted relationship with the police department, where folks knew they could call the police in if they needed them, but also knew that they could intervene in providing supports to people who were traumatized, supports to kids who needed help getting a job, supports to our kids who need help. Sometimes it's help with some serious problems that aren't getting any response. And you know what happens when we make it easier to get a job than a gun? Right. Gun violence goes down. Mm-hmm. And so one of my plans is to actually double the number of summer youth employment. Summer is always the time we also have a rise in gun violence. People should ask why. Why every summer? Even when crime rates are low, every summer. We've got kids who aren't getting the attention they need, and I'm not gonna lose another generation on my watch. And that's gonna be whether it's to police violence or whether it's simply to a failure of this city to pay attention to our communities and answer the call, which is for jobs, which is for more quality schools and teachers, and which is for opportunities for our kids and our families, and that's what I'm gonna bring.
And when we talk about these community-based organizations policing their own, well, not necessarily policing, but being able to intervene in our own communities, would this be something that you think funding should be provided for?
Yes, and look, let me just say one thing. The city has rightly increased the money for violence interruption. That's a good thing, and I praise the de Blasio administration for doing that. But here's the issue. We have these phenomenal groups. And by the way, this is proven. There's data and research behind this. I'm not talking about solutions that haven't been demonstrated to work. We just don't talk about the kid that didn't get killed, right? But the reality is you've got Jacobi Hospital in the Bronx that is demonstrated that with social work and outreach, they've brought gun violence down 40%. They're struggling to get $400,000. Thank goodness that Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Senator Chuck Schumer are now trying to get more money in that budget, but the city has to be faster and better at getting that money to the ground, but also recognize what we're hearing from violence interrupters. They're asking for more mental health services. Mm-hmm. A huge part of what we have to acknowledge, and we certainly have to acknowledge it now due to COVID, but it was true before COVID as well. When we have trauma, which, by the way, poverty is trauma. If you're struggling to get a meal, if you're stressed about getting evicted from your apartment with no place to go, if you've got a rise in domestic violence rates because of the stress going on in the household, all of that is trauma. And it often begets violence unless it gets services and supports in the mental health interventions it needs. And violence interrupters who have been highly successful are asking for more mental health services in communities. And that's something that I'm going to provide, including trauma-informed care in our schools, because again, we have demonstrated that sends violence down and graduation rates up. We've got to recognize our kids are whole people, our families are whole families, and we got to keep them whole.
Right, like with the work Erica Ford does with Life Camp. I know we've had her on the show a few times.
Yep, exactly. It's brilliant work. You know, I had Erica and some of her youth organizers from Life Camp back when I was at the New School as senior vice president at the New School for Social Justice, and kids from Parkland and some of community youth from the South Side of Chicago come together to talk about gun violence and all the ways it happens. And the truth is, and we should not hide from it, community-based resources like quality education, like identifying learning disabilities and getting kids the supports they need, like mental health services, like making sure there's job opportunities for people that are real and meaningful, and making sure that people actually can just pay the rent. These are all things that change the equation and solve the problems. And so we need police to go after crime, and they will go after crime in a My Wiley administration. We need them to solve crime, which they need to be able to do better by focusing on that crime. But asking them to be mental health professionals is not even something they want to do. It's a waste of our precious dollars when we could do it the right way. And that's what I'm going to do as mayor.
At the first debate, it seems like that you got a little spicy with everybody during the first debate. Seems like you and Eric Adams got into it a little bit. What is your feelings towards Eric Adams? It seems like he said a bunch of things you didn't like, and when they were like, "Please stop," you was like, "No, I'm going to finish what I have to say."
Well, look, this isn't about Eric Adams. This is about what we're going to do as a city. I have real differences with Eric Adams on policy-making decisions. I'm not going backwards on stop and frisk. Stop and frisk is something we need a clear answer on in this city. We know it's racist. We know it's unconstitutional. We know it didn't solve a crime, and I am clear. There is no stop and frisk in a My Wiley administration. We will not go backwards. We're going to go forwards with smart policing, not lazy policing. And smart policing is focused on doing the job constitutionally, actually doing the legwork to investigate and solve the crime after it's been committed, but also not alienating the community by throwing kids up against the wall. You know, there are stories out there, and kids that I know, some of whom who drop out of school because of the trauma they've experienced with being harassed by police officers. I've had to go to court with my own godson, who is beautiful, and he is dark skinned, and he is 6'3" tall. So I've had to go to court with him because he was skateboarding while black. I've had to go to court with him because he was sitting in a park while black. This is not police work. This is harassment. And the supports we need is to focus so much of the police work on the job, and that is not the job. So I'm just being very clear about what a Maya Wiley administration will do. And I'm not going to take flip-flopping from any candidate that isn't going to be clear about what their position is on this incredibly important issue for our communities. This is one when Breonna, let's just call it, when Breonna Floyd, I'm sorry, because it's still, right?
Breonna Taylor.
No. I'm talking about Breonna Floyd,
okay.
George Floyd's daughter.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Oh, Breonna.
Remember after that, but Breonna Taylor's another one we can call out. You're absolutely right. Mm-hmm. But Breonna said her father changed the world. Mm-hmm. That was a call to action, because we have not sufficiently changed the world yet, but we can. But we won't change it if we won't confront what failed us, and stop and frisk failed us. Going back to an anti-crime unit that even Commissioner Shea said was the last vestige of an unconstitutional practice. And this is from the police commissioner I've said I'd give a pink slip to, because he was glowingly talking about what was clearly videotape of unconstitutional policing. We are not going backwards. We're going to go forwards in a Maya Wiley administration.
You know, I wanted to ask you, you brought up Bill de Blasio earlier in his administration, and I know for a period of time you did work with him, and then you left. So what caused you to decide to leave?
Well, look, you know, my entire career, I am the child of civil rights activists, you know, and I went to law school to be a civil rights lawyer. And I spent, before I went into city government as the first Black woman to be a council to a New York City mayor, I spent 25 years of my life working on racial justice as a litigator and as a policy organizer and advocate, fighting structural racism. I went into city government because it was another opportunity to actually make a difference in people's lives in all the ways that could be transformational. And I was really proud of what we did there together. There was a time when I felt that I could be more effective on the outside, and in fact left and continued to work with city government as a volunteer for the New York City Civilian Complaint Review Board, which was incredibly important to me because you know, we finally got the Daniel Pantaleo case. I was proud to move that case in the year I was there over the police department with our most serious recommendations to get him off the force and terminate him. And ultimately that led to his termination. And I'm grateful for all the opportunities I had in government, but I'm also grateful for going to the new school as a senior vice president for social justice and establishing a digital equity laboratory, because these are all issues that we have to focus on no matter what position we take.
Right.
But now in this historic crisis, it is a time for government to be aggressively transformational and bold, to really use this crisis and this opportunity where so much of the city has actually seen what it looks like to fail communities of color, which were ground zero for COVID, always a ground zero in every crisis, and actually start to fix what's broken. So that's why I'm running now.
Now, his daughter's name is Gianna Floyd. Gianna, not Brianna.
I'm sorry.
Gianna Floyd.
I'm sorry.
I wanted to ask about, they were criticizing you they say that you allegedly took money from a hedge fund guy, from a billionaire, and they said that you were saying you were from the people. Is there any truth to that?
I've taken no money from, I think there are a few issues that are going on in this race.
You talking about George Soros? Or?
Yeah,
I think they're talking about independent expenditures.
Mm-hmm.
That's as you know, because the Supreme Court made what I think is one of the most disastrous decisions ever made for democracy, is the Supreme Court essentially allowed independent expenditures. But by definition, independent expenditures are independent. So, I can't make any comment about the independent expenditure. It's not related to our campaign. So when I say I'm from the people, I'm talking about what we're doing as the campaign for Maya Wiley. And I'm really excited and proud to have so much support, including from 1199 SEIU, which is frankly 200,000 strong in New York City residents who are home health aides, who are nurses, who are administrators in our public hospitals and our safety net hospitals, all the people we were cheering for at 7 p.m. every night during COVID. And, some of those workers, essential workers, didn't get protective gear. Some of those essential workers right now are struggling to pay the rent. One of the major issues I heard from them. I know one, Audia Williams, lives here in Flatbush. She travels 2 hours each way to get from Brooklyn to Queens to a client in a wheelchair. She's lucky because she has a union behind her that fights for her. She gets paid minimum wage. She works a 40-hour work week. She travels 4 hours a day on public transit, more than one fare zone. And let me just tell you something. That woman stands in a food pantry line twice a week. That is not the New York we should tolerate. And when I say I'm with the people, that's who I'm talking about.
Absolutely.
Maya Wiley, you know what I did want to ask you on a personal level? How has it been for you now in this different position, running for mayor, and you see all these headlines, right, of people saying things about you that you have to explain? It is a bit of a dirty race here in New York City. There's a lot of different characters involved. So mentally, how has this been for you?
I'll be really honest, and thank you for raising that question. I knew and one of the things I explored before I decided to run was how this would impact my family and my children, because it is a very important position. It is a position that a lot of people seek, obviously, for power, because it's a lot of power. And with that comes a lot of machine guns that come your way. People think you're getting in their way. And so I had no illusion that I could win this. I also had no illusion that when people saw I could, people would come with everything they could try to throw at us. And for me, what has been most important is, holding on to what matters. My parents really demonstrated courage for me, and they demonstrated it by making a lot of personal sacrifices to fight for racial justice, and fight for their own love, frankly. And I saw what they went through. I knew that putting myself out there would not be easy, but you know what I hold on to? I hold on to Audia Williams, who I just mentioned to you. I hold on to the people who I see when I am like at Edenwald houses as I was in the Bronx, or in Jackson houses, or when I talk to my godson who just finished high school, and I am so proud of him, and I won't lie. It was a struggle because of his trauma. And, when I think of all the people, including a little girl that I saw yesterday at the Puerto Rican Day Parade, who was so excited to take a picture of me and tell me she wanted to be a mayor, little brown girl. That's what I think of. I'm like, bring it. You want to sling at me because you think you can find some dirt, bring it. Because I'm not bringing dirt, I'm bringing solutions. And all I am going to do today and every day is focus on the people of this city. And what keeps me strong is all the love and all the commitment, and frankly, all the support I'm getting from the people I care about most, which are the people who need a different kind of leadership.
Well, voting is now for early voting, and the 22nd is your last election day. We have ranked choice voting, so we want to make sure we explain what that is because it's the first time we've done that in New York City. So I want you to explain that, and also just give me your thoughts on if you like this new system.
Well, thank you. Well, first of all, I co-chaired the campaign to bring ranked choice voting on that ballot initiative. I did so proudly as a civil rights lawyer because for me, our political voice matters. And what we were seeing in elections is if we go to a runoff election, what happens is literally too many of us don't come back to the polls for the next election. So if one person doesn't win, our voice needs to count if it goes to a runoff. And what ranked choice voting gives us the ability to do is to vote for who our second choice would be, and our third choice, and our fourth choice. You can literally list up to 5 candidates, and I hope you list up to 5 candidates, y'all, because we want everyone's voice to count. So if your number one does not get, if one person doesn't win 50 plus 1%, a majority of the vote, it will go to instant runoff. You don't have to go back to the polls and forego a paycheck or find childcare or try to figure out how to make it work. That's why so many of our people don't go back. It's because we've made it too hard to vote in this country. Mm-hmm. But this means your voice will still be heard because you will have said who your second choice is or your third choice. So if it goes through more than one round of runoff, you always have a voice in who comes next on your list. So please fill it out. I hope you will, and ask for you to fill out Maya Wiley number 1. That means when you see my name on the ballot, fill out the number 1 bubble, just like a standardized test. But fill out who you want as number 2 and fill out at their name the number 2 bubble. And figure out who you want as number 3 and fill out their name.
Who's your number 2, Maya Wiley?
I am focused on winning on 10,
We know who your number 1 is. Who's your number 2?
My number 1 is Maya Wiley, and that's what I'm focused on. And I want everybody to think about who your number 2 is, and your number 3, and your number 4, and your number 5. I want your voice to count.
Well, we appreciate you for checking in. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Everybody get out and vote. This is historic for us, so get out and vote.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to be with you, and I'll see you next time, I hope.
All right. It's Maya Wiley. It's The Breakfast Club. Good morning.